Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, ready for takeoff as the sports world continues to evolve with a second round of playoffs, baseball approaching the quarter pole of their season, and other things to dissect as I'll break down all that's happening as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that the first round of both the NBA and Stanley Cup playoffs are finally in the books, and I get it, it's been a little over 2 weeks, feels like an eternity. And what we thought was going to be an epic weekend, considering that you had not one, not two, not three, but 4 Game 7s, 2 in each sport with the NBA and NHL. And I would love to start off with the NBA, but I cannot. Only because those Game 7s fell by the wayside big time. Because to break down what happened in Denver, which of course I'll get to, where the Nuggets went going away after a big second and third quarter, and then last night the Warriors, after a pathetic Game 6 performance in their building at home, came up big there yesterday behind Buddy Hield of all people, which one more time I'll break that down a little bit. But what we saw over the last 2 nights, and in particular I have to start last night and then I'll go backwards, because how much have I talked about the Winnipeg Jets, a team with the President's Trophy, best team in the sport, we know the whole deal, their MVP goalie and one Connor Hellebuyck, who is in the running for one of the top 3 in the sport to go along with Nikita Kucherov, and I believe the other person off the top of my head, I should know this, but I know in the top 3, he is one of those 3 guys. And with what happened there in game number 6 in St. Louis, where he gets pulled again, after giving up 4 goals over a little bit over a 5-minute span in the second period. And this was the 3rd time in the series, all 3 games in St. Louis, where Hellebuyck was pulled. And to me, as I've said all along, go back to the start of the postseason, even going back to Thursday's podcast, where I said the spotlight is on him to deliver this team past this round. Now, does this mean if they lose to Dallas in a 7-game series, is it still a good season for the Jets? And this is me talking, based on my assessment, when you have the best record in the sport, and I get it, the NHL, unlike the NBA, when you do have the President's Trophy, it's almost a curse because those teams rarely win or even get to a Stanley Cup final. And last night was one where they had to get out of that game and that series alive in order for them to meet the Dallas Stars, who won the night before against Colorado. But as far as last night, here it was, just a minute 10 in the game. Jordan Kyrou scores that goal, and you're thinking, oh boy, are the Jets going to gag? Are they just going to choke this series away? And even though that they tied the game, but the 2 goals that were certainly questionable. I can't fault Hellebuyck on that first goal. That's what a defenseman had to get back, and Hellebuyck couldn't do anything about it. But the other 2 goals are certainly skeptical. Now, based on some turnovers, some sloppy play by the Jets in their zone. Actually, the second goal wasn't in their zone. It was a situation where Nikolai Ehlers had the turnover there, where they had the odd man rush, and therefore the defenseman had slid during the path of the sight from Hellebuyck to where the goal was scored, and that made it 3-1. The second goal was a bad goal altogether, although a turnover there deep, and just a shot where it was a one-on-one against the defenseman. And for the goaltender, which to me, he had those 2 goals were very shaky. The second goal that he gave up there to Matthew Joseph was one that certainly he could have been able to stop, and certainly did not play that angle very well. And then the third goal, again, I understand that the defenseman was trying to block the puck there, but for Radek Faksa, for him to get the goal, and it was a beautiful shot there, was top shelf over the left shoulder, and that made you think that was when the building went silent. All the life and the air went out of that building. And when you give up a goal there, especially those goals late in the period, always seem to be crushers. Now, does that mean that they're ultimately backbreakers to where the game is over? Well, you pretty much thought so yesterday, because all of the air was let out of the balloon, meaning the crowd in that building, and the Jets were flat. They didn't really have big opportunities there in the third period. Now, as we get deeper into the period, now we're down to the final 2 minutes, where they pulled the goalie for an extra attacker, and they tried to attack the net, and with a minute and 56 seconds left, you had the goal there by Vladimir Nemetsnikov, who now made it a 3-2 game, and then you think to yourself, all right, let's see if they get the next goal. And it's very rare that, even with 2 minutes remaining, that a team gets that equalizer goal. And as it was, they pressured Jordan Binnington, the goaltender of the Blues, constantly there throughout the course of those final 2 minutes until the final, literally 2 seconds to go in the game, 1.8 to be exact, where Cole Peretti gets the goal, and it was just bedlam in Winnipeg, to where people outside with the watch party and, of course, in the building, the roof could have come off from that arena, and it was just one of those situations where you knew with just less than 2 seconds to go, the Blues were shot. There was no way they're going to win the game. I thought even at that point, how could they? And they did have some opportunities in the overtime, and actually went into a second overtime, to where Connor Hellebuyck actually made amends from some of the sloppy play earlier. He made a couple of big saves. And then in the double overtime, you had to get to a second frame, to where deep into that second overtime, where you had Adam Lowry, Johnny on the spot with 1 minute and 50 seconds to go, gets the goal there. Binnington just collapses to the ice, and the Blues were just despondent. And how could you not be? And I'll get to them in a second. But Winnipeg survives. And any big-time team, any good team that has any grit, toughness, and this Winnipeg Jet team does not have a track record. All you got to do is go back to last year against Colorado, where they, as I've said time after time, they were ambushed. And here it was, with their backs up against the wall, with literally 2 minutes remaining in their season, down 2 goals. Not only do they tie the game, but they win it in double overtime. As big of a win, big of a Game 7 win and comeback that you've seen in quite some time. Now, I understand it's the first round. Let's see if this sticks in the next round, which I'll preview in a moment. But this is one that is going to go down in the annals of NHL Stanley Cup playoff history as a team, especially one that was a President's Trophy winner, to pretty much rise from the dead, come from behind and win this game and win this series, was something that hopefully for the Jet fan, they'll look back on if they do get on this magic carpet ride to a Stanley Cup final and win the whole thing. That's the game they're going to look at as the one that propelled them on this run. And if you're the Stars, if you're the Blues, I'll get to the Stars in a minute, because that's the other Game 7, which was phenomenal. But for St. Louis, you fought, you were valiant, you were that close. And I'm sure the citizens and the fans of the St. Louis Blues, they haven't slept a wink, and they probably won't sleep all spring into the summer. And who knows if they've even eaten as they wake up this morning, tossing the cup of coffee and the Cheerios and the toast aside, because I would have done that if I was a fan of the St. Louis Blues. And what more can you say? It was a great series. I understand you won all the home games, but you had just a golden opportunity to come out of that series alive, to be an 8 seed, to upend the 1 seed. And we've seen that plenty in the Stanley Cup playoffs, unlike in the NBA, where generally the better teams do win. And one more time, they were just a hair from getting out of that series alive. And unfortunately, they were unable to seal the deal and close out the Jets there in regulation, or even in the overtime for that matter. But they should have won the game, and really had no business losing that game, considering. But obviously the pressure, they shrunk and they folded like a cheap suit. There's nothing more I can even add to that. And to me, when I think about the Game 7s over the weekend, that topped what happened there on Saturday in Dallas with the Stars and Avalanche, because the Avalanche came out to a 2-0 lead, including a goal there, about a half minute into the third period by Nathan MacKinnon, who scored his 7th goal. And this was on the heels of a Game 6 when they were down 4-3 going into the third. And MacKinnon had that weird goal that went off of the shoulder of the Dallas Stars, I believe it was the defenseman, where the Avalanche were able to get out of Colorado with a win and bring it back to Dallas for a Game 7. So they were able to survive that. But now the momentum on their side, they get a goal early, and then they get that goal in the third period, to where you thought, wow, the next goal is going to be crucial, as you know, because anytime a team has a 2-goal lead, especially in a deciding game, whomever scores that next goal is pretty much going to win the game. Now, granted that the Stars did get that next goal by Mikko Rantanen, and that's a name that I'm sure the Avalanche fan is probably just thinking that guy was on our team. Granted, he probably wasn't going to sign a long-term deal. More on that in a second. But for Rantanen to get the goal, and he had a big series and obviously a big Game 7, but for him to get that goal, to make it 2-1, to give them life, and Colorado, like I mentioned, if they would have gotten that third goal, the Stars would have been sent home packing. And it would have been a tough way to end their season, considering that the Stars had led from in front throughout the whole year, despite the fact that Winnipeg was in their sights. But what I mean by that is that they had that 2 seed locked up for quite some time, despite the fact that Colorado may have threatened. But it was a scenario where if they didn't get that goal by Rantanen, and it was going to be a situation where they would have been it would have been a long off season. And who knows if changes would have been made, considering the Stars have gone to back-to-back Western Conference Finals. But as it was, for Rantanen to get that goal, and then just 6 minutes after him cutting the deficit in half, they get a power play where Rantanen scores, ties the game, and then Wyatt Johnson on another power play where Colorado just imploded. They get the game-winning goal there with a little less than 4 minutes to go in the game. And then Rantanen gets the hat trick. He tops it all off with the empty netter there at the end. And the Avalanche, who had a big second half, and I understand they had to play uphill throughout the series. They did take a 1-0 series lead where they won 5-1. Stars get the next 2 games, and then it was 1 win, 1 loss, back and forth, remaining for the rest of the series between the home teams, where the home team won Game 5, Colorado wins Game 6, and then Dallas wins Game 7. And now you have a scenario where Dallas will face Winnipeg here in the first round. And just a tough loss for Colorado. They had a team where they had Mikko Rantanen at the beginning of the year, who was going to be a free agent after this year. He gets shipped to Carolina, only for him to get shipped before the deadline to Dallas. And here it was in the biggest game of the year. He foils his former mates. He foils his former team. And he did sign that long extension, 8 years, $96 million to stay in Dallas. And in the process, sends his former teammates into the spring and summer, or as you hear time and time again, to Cancun a little bit earlier than normal. And the Stars prevail to go up in what's going to be a heavyweight matchup against the Winnipeg Jets here in the conference semis. And a couple other things to note when we look at these series with Toronto and Ottawa. That was a series where we thought that if Toronto was going to lose that Game 6, and they were, I don't want to say that close, but they were on the brink. They had a 2-0 lead. It was 2-1 going into the third period. The Senators get the goal where they tie the game, and you thought to yourself, oh no, they cannot blow this lead. And even to the chagrin of their head coach, Craig Berube, because Berube, after the Senators scored that goal, you could see him there from the shot on TV where he just hung his head. Now, I don't know if that was out of disgust. I don't know if that was out of frustration or maybe disbelief to think that we're going to go back to Toronto here, tied at 3 apiece in a winner-take-all. But as it was, William Nylander, who had a big-time game on top of Austin Matthews, and Mitch Marner got bailed out because even though he had a big series early on, but Marner always falters down the stretch of these games. But even with Matthews getting that goal and Nylander getting the goal to make it 2-0, but for Johnny on the spot, Max Pacioretty, who's been on a million teams, but high in the slot there with about 5.5 minutes to go, gets the go-ahead goal, and then Nylander gets the empty netter to make it 4-2, and they wipe their brows and exhale to know that they didn't have to go back home to a Game 7 where you knew that building was going to be tight as a drum. But that was not to be the case as the Maple Leafs survive and move on to play the Florida Panthers. As we know, they disposed of the Lightning there in 5. And then to round out the first round, the Vegas Golden Knights, they beat the Minnesota Wild there in a game number 6 where you had Jack Eichel scores first goal of the series there in Game 6. And Mark Stone, who also got a goal in the game, goal and assist for both players as the Golden Knights move on. And they had a 3-1 lead, even though Ryan Hartman, who had both goals for the Wild, got them closer, but they were unable to tie the game late and push it into an overtime. And that's now 8 straight, not necessarily postseasons because they did miss the playoffs last year, but they have not won a first-round series since 2015. So in the last 8 playoff appearances by the Wild, they've been one and done. Who knows what's going to happen there in the Twin Cities with this wild team. But because they can't go over the hump, kind of like the Toronto Maple Leafs have had, granted that they've won 2 of the last 3 years in the first round, but remember that long stretch that the Maple Leafs had? Now the Wild have, so who knows what they're going to do this offseason, but Vegas moves on to play the Edmonton Oilers. And then Edmonton in a Game 6 in their building with their firepower. No, not Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, considering that Connor McDavid had 1 assist out of the 6 goals that were scored by the Edmonton Oilers, and Leon Draisaitl didn't even touch the score sheet. But for the Oilers, they were able to outlast the Kings, just a bitter end to the Kings season where they had a 2-0 series lead, and then Edmonton just swept them from that point on as the Kings are bye-bye and go into the Pacific Ocean there. So now it's all set up here for the second round as I'll break it down. I talked about the Carolina and Capitals series because those series were already in the books where Carolina disposed of the Devils in 5 and the same for the Capitals beating the Canadiens. So if you want to hear a little preview of that, I did say the Caps will win in 6, but I talked about that on Thursday's podcast. So if you want to go back and check that, please feel free in the archives, Apple, Spotify, of course, on YouTube at JAYREELZ. But as far as the other 3 series, and of course I'll break down the schedule. Now, Frederik Andersen, who did not perform in the last game against the Devils, the starting goaltender you would think in the opener against the Capitals, did get an extension right before round 2. 1 year, I believe, almost less than $3 million, 35-year-old goaltender who is good, not great, and he's going to need to be great in the series in order for them to advance. So we'll have to keep that in mind as far as how he'll perform here in the second round against the Capitals. But here's where we have, schedule-wise, in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Tonight you have Florida at Toronto, and it's weird. They have to break it up because of the Game 7s over the weekend, because you would think that Carolina-Washington, I thought, should have been the first game, considering both of those teams have not played since last Wednesday. And I get it that Florida did play on a Wednesday too, and Toronto closed out their series Thursday, but you're going to have Florida at Toronto for Game 1 tonight, followed by Carolina, Washington, and Edmonton, Vegas tomorrow. All those games are on ESPN tomorrow, 7 and 9:30. And then you'll have Florida, Toronto, Dallas, Winnipeg at 9:30 will be game number 2 for Florida, Toronto, of course. And then Dallas, Winnipeg will have game 1. All those games on ESPN. And then you'll have the schedule moving forward where Carolina, Washington on Thursday, Edmonton, Vegas. Those will also be on ESPN, 7 and 9:30. But of course, we'll be back on the airwaves here on Thursday's podcast to recap what happened here in these first 3 days. But as far as previewing these series, Toronto, I want to root for them. And I hope they go far this postseason. And maybe there's a bit of a revenge factor considering that they did lose in this round to them 2 years ago to the Florida Panthers. That's when the Panthers went on to win to win the Eastern Conference, but lose in the Cup Final to Vegas. So I think the Panthers, they're going to be a tough out, and they've already shown that the way they disposed of the Lightning. I think it's going to be a 6-game series, but I think the Panthers are going to win in 6, but I'm going to root like hell and hard for the Maple Leafs to go far. And why not? This team has not made it to a Cup Final, as I've mentioned a million times, in 58 years. And the Panthers have been to back-to-back Cup Finals. No shade on Florida, but let's see Toronto go far. And a Toronto-Washington Eastern Conference Final would be full of star power. Ovechkin, Matthews, John Tavares. I mean, that is one that I'm sure the NHL, maybe even the good sports fan will tune in to watch. But I think the Panthers will prevail here. I'm going to pick them only because of their toughness, their grit. They know how to win these games. And Toronto, despite them getting over the hump in another first-round win, as I mentioned, second time in 3 years, can they do it again? I have to believe it when I see it. So that's why I'm going to pick the Panthers in 6. Could it go 7? It could, but I think the Panthers, again, will finish them off at 6. And as far as the Western Conference, now I'm going to root for Edmonton big time. And there is a part of me, I think Edmonton could win this series. Do I think they will? I think Vegas, they know their way around this postseason. And Vegas, remember, 2 years ago in this round, beat Edmonton in 6 games after they split the first 4 games. And I kind of see that going the same way. And similar to Toronto, I'm rooting hard for Edmonton. I would love to see them advance and get back to a Cup Final. But I think the Golden Knights, home ice doesn't mean anything, at least to me at this point. But I think they have enough despite the fact that Edmonton, of course, what they did last year, and I'm going to root hard, but I think Vegas is going to win. I was going to say 6. You know what? I'll say in 6. Maybe it goes 7, and Edmonton can win a Game 7 in Vegas. But I think Vegas will prevail and win this series as well. Dallas, Winnipeg. Now, this is going to be I think out of all 4 series, this is probably the one it's going to be the hardest to pick. Dallas, very stout, and they're going to have Jason Robertson and Miro Heiskanen come back in this series. They're forward, top goal-scoring forward, and they're defensemen. So they are getting some reinforcements big time. Winnipeg, they showed you their mental grit and toughness here in this previous series, but I got news for you. If that was the Dallas Stars last night, they would have not have won that series. So that's why I think the Stars, and they know the rigors of a postseason, as I mentioned before, back-to-back Western Conference Finals. And remember, this team made it to a Cup Final just 5 years ago. I get it, a lot of those players aren't there, but you do have a bit of a core that's still there from that time, the Jamie Benns of the world, etc. But I think Dallas is going to win a 7-game series. I think they can actually win in 6, but I'll give Winnipeg their due from this standpoint. You know what? Scrap that. I'm picking the Stars to win in 6. And remember, I picked the Stars to get out of this conference back in October to represent the Stanley Cup to play the Rangers. And we all know the Rangers are nowhere in the Stanley Cup playoff mix. So in that regard, I'm going to pick the Stars to win in 6 because even though it was a home ice deal in the first round, I could see them splitting here. I could see them, Dallas winning one of these next 2, and I could see Winnipeg splitting in Dallas. But I could see Dallas winning in Winnipeg in a Game 5, and then they'll come back and win a Game 6 in their building. Now, I can see it going 7 where Winnipeg will win Game 6 in Dallas, but then I can see Dallas win Game 7. Any which way you cut it, I think Dallas will win the series, which will have Dallas, Edmonton, Toronto, Washington. If that's the case, that is a conference final. I get it. There's no New York Rangers. There's no Chicago Blackhawks, Boston Bruins, etc. But I would think Gary Bettman would take that, considering that if you have Dallas, Edmonton, which would be a rematch of last year's Western Conference Final, and Toronto, Washington, for what I mentioned earlier, they would take that in a heartbeat. So that's what we have with the NHL. A couple of coaching situations here before I move it along. The Rangers hire Mike Sullivan, who was dropped by the Penguins, and literally 5 minutes later, the Rangers gobble him up. 2-time Cup winners, you know, dating back to the 2016 and 2017 when the Penguins beat the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators. So they get him in the mix. Let's see if he's the answer to the Ranger ills from this past season where Peter Laviolette couldn't get them into the playoffs after getting to a conference final the year before. And then John Cooper, the Lightning coach, although rumored that they may have been a parting of the ways between the head coach and the organization. Not the case. He's going to come back for another year. So good for him. He's the longest tenured coach in the NHL, dating back to the 2013 season. So for Cooper, he stays in Tampa. Let's see if they regroup and get back on the beam to see how far they go next year. But obviously that's a long way between now and then. But Cooper stays there in the Panhandle. So that's what I have with the NHL. And now as I segue to the NBA, and their Game 7s were anything but what we saw there in the NHL over the last 2 nights. And we'll start off with what happened. I guess we'll go back just a step because you did have a Game 6 with the Knicks and Pistons. And that was one, just like the other 5 games, went down to the wire, tooth and nail. Knicks had a 13-point lead in the fourth quarter. That got squandered quick, fast, in a hurry in a furious comeback by the Pistons. Actually had a 112-105 lead. And then the Knicks came back, a tip-in by Mikal Bridges. Jalen Brunson with a little sorcery underneath the basket as he was twisting and turning, almost walked, where he got that layup, which was big. And then, of course, the dagger 3 at 113 up, where he iced the game. And then you had that inbounds pass to where the corner or near the corner where Malik Beasley, who had quite a few three-pointers in the first half to keep him in the game. And as the ball went to him, all I thought was at that point, when it bounced off his fingertips and out of bounds, it made me think of what happened in that Buck series, if you recall, where Gary Trent Jr. not only threw a ball away to the opposing team, but had the ball go through his hands and legs, which secured the, not necessarily at that point, but gave an opportunity for the Pacers to win the game there, and we talked about there on Thursday's podcast. So as Beasley, the ball went off his fingertips and had a wide open look if he would have caught the ball and shot it, but that was not to be, as the Pistons, and a bitter loss, goes into their offseason with a bunch of question marks, and the Knicks survive another first round as they did last year against the Sixers, and now move on to play the Celtics, which I'll preview in a moment. But as far as the 2 Game 7s, where you had the Nuggets do what they had to do there on Saturday night after losing there on Thursday at Game 6 in LA, where you had James Harden scored 28 on 10 of 20 shooting, and Kawhi Leonard, I believe, had 27 in the game. And even though I don't want to say had to hang on to win game number 6, but even with a little bit of a comeback there by the Nuggets, but you had that Norman Powell 3, which cemented the game where they were up by 6, and they were not in danger of losing the game, although the Nuggets made it interesting there. But now you get to Game 7 on Saturday night, and it was a situation where after the Clippers had a lead there, after the first quarter up by 5, second and third quarters were all Nuggets as they outscored the Clippers 72-40 en route to a 120-101 victory. Nikola Jokic did not have a big game. I believe he had 16 points on 4 of 13 shooting, but it was the other players that certainly stepped up and did what they had to do. And as I talked about before, it's always the role players that need big-time contributions in order to win Game 7s like this. And we're going to talk about that in the Rocket Warriors Game 7, and certainly from a road team, it's very rare where you get the road team player to do so. But with the Game 7, having it in their home building and just having a fourth quarter where they put their feet up, and it was a scenario where, and I hate to bring it up once again, as long as I've had this podcast, and you have to go back to the second episode that I produced and put forth on the website and on all my social media channels, etc., where I've been on James Harden's case. And I get it, he is low-hanging fruit. But when he has a Game 6, and not that it was epic by any means, but when he had a Game 6 where he shot 50% from the field, 28 points, and you thought to yourself, all right, can he do that in a Game 7? Is there any way, shape, or form he could deliver? Even in a loss where you could say, all right, he contributed, he did whatever it took. And what happened? 2 for 8, 7 points, 13 assists. And I want to hear about the 13 assists. Well, he distributed. You're a big-time focal point of that offense. He's a guy that needed to put up minimum 25 points in the game. And what did he do? He shrunk again in a big spot. And I don't want to hear about the assist either, that he was trying to facilitate and get open shots for his teammates. Nonsense. You're an all-time scorer. You're going to go into the Hall of Fame despite the fact that he doesn't have any Hall of Fame moments, especially in the postseason. And on top of all that, that's almost like the big-time Major League Baseball player or batter, where let's say in a Game 7, he goes 0 for 2 with 2 walks, but the 2 walks were in the first and the 5th innings, and it didn't amount to anything. But in the middle part, and let's say in the 3rd inning and in the 8th inning, he came up and he popped up and he struck out. All right, well, he got on base 2 times. So what? Didn't amount to a rally, didn't amount to any runs. And that was James Harden's Game 7 in a nutshell. And how many more times are you going to see this? And I get it. He is easy to pick on. He is, again, a guy that certainly when he doesn't deliver, it's easy to pound. But one more time, when his team needed him the most, he shrunk. And you saw him there in the fourth quarter where he sat out the most of the fourth quarter. And maybe that was Ty Lue saying to coach, I've had enough. And Harden, look in the mirror. How many more times are we going to witness this as NBA fans, him not being able to stand up, step up, and deliver his team to a next round or to a big-time absolute must-win? And he didn't do it. And there isn't anything else I could add to that. And even though you had Aaron Gordon who had a big-time game there, as you saw, and even though it was spread out, you had, 7 Denver Nuggets in double figures, and Jokic didn't have a big game. He had 16 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists. That's very pedestrian for him. But they didn't need a lot as he sat pretty much all the fourth quarter, and the Nuggets move on to play the Oklahoma City Thunder. And as far as the game there last night, Warriors with a Game 6 that you could just flush. I know Fred VanVleet had a big-time game where he had 29, 8, and 7. And even though Steph Curry was very quiet in the game, and you didn't have a scenario where even Jimmy Butler, those scored a lot of points, but did not have a big impact on that game. And now got pushed to a Game 7 to where when the team landed in Houston there early Saturday morning, all the players got together, led by Steph and Draymond Green, players only meeting to say, hey, we laid a big, giant deuce on center court there at Chase Center. There's no way that we got to go back home losers. We got to come out fighting and win. And sure enough, that's what they did. Not only was it Steph Curry and what he did, what did he get? 27 points in the game, a bunch of threes there in the second half, but it was Buddy Hield, of all people. There you go, a role player who stepped up. A guy who, think about this, in games 5 and 6, had a combined, ready for this? 4 points. He scored 4 more points than I did in those games, and I didn't even play. And guess what? In game 6, he scored as many points as I did, and I don't even play. He put up a big fat goose egg. That's right. Buddy Hield, a guy who, all right, when he has his moments and when he's on fire in that heat check mode, he is no joke. And guess what? Last night, 6 3-pointers, the most in a Game 7 for a first half, and he had 9 in the game, 9 from 11 from 3, had 33 points in the game, and the Rockets had no answer for him. And Jimmy Butler chipped in with 20 and 8, I believe. But when it came to Alperen Sengun, who did not have a good shooting game, and Amen Thompson had 24 points, all right, fine. But here's the one guy that I'm going to point a finger at, and this was a guy that was a high draft pick. 2021, number 2 overall. Jalen Green, if you want to be a big-time player in this league, I hope you're in the gym right now, working on your shot, working on whatever. Because what he did in these final 3 games was just flat out embarrassing. Shot 3 for 8 in games 5 and in games 7. Both games at home, I might add, where he put up paltry amount of points. I believe he had 7 points. Let me just pull this up here just to make sure I get this correct. He had 11 points in game 5, shot 3 for 8. 12 points in game 6. And even though his team bailed him out, shot 3 from 11 from the field. And then last night, 8 points, and he shot 3 from 8 from the field. This is a guy who I'm not going to say is a high-flying scorer, but we saw him score 38 in Game 2 against the Warriors, and I believe had his moment there in Game 4 as well. But other than that, he was a no-show. And I understand he's a young player in the league, and I know that this is a big-time learning experience for him. Understood. But you got to show up. And that he did not do here in these final 3 games, and especially last night when his team needed him the most. And even though the Rockets tried to cut that deficit, well, they had to play pretty much uphill, especially when you got to the second half. And I believe they cut it 77-70 before Steph had that 3 to make it 80-70. And they couldn't get any closer. And what more can you say? The Warriors, who did this 2 years ago against Sacramento, when they lost the Game 6 in their building to the Kings, and then they won in Sacramento Game 7. And this time they had a 3-1 series lead. They couldn't win a Game 5. We saw it happen in Game 6. And then now another road win in Game 7. And the Warriors, their toughness, their mettle, their DNA of what's left of their championship DNA when it comes to Steph Curry, Draymond in particular, but then Buddy Hield. I mean, that was one that nobody saw coming. So they advance, they move on, and they'll play the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I'll get a look at the schedule in a moment as we'll break that down. But as far as these series go, now you had Game 1 of the conference semis beginning in the East, and I talked about this on Thursday's podcast, and I thought long and hard, and I said the Pacers would win in 7, and I said I wouldn't be surprised if they win in 6, but I said to myself, let me give the Cavaliers their due, because they won 65 games in a row, or I believe 64, whatever it was, and I said to them, 64, and I said, you know what, let me give them their just due, let me push them to a 7th game, because I don't think the Pacers would be afraid to win a Game 7 in their building. Well, as it is, they've gotten off the deck pretty well here, because the Pacers, even though the Cavaliers had to fight and scratch their way back to where they had a 102-101 lead after Max Strus hit a 3 there with about how much time left? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I believe it was maybe 7 minutes to go, somewhere around there. And then the Pacers behind Tyrese Halliburton, who had 23 and 11 in the game, and actually had a 3 to follow up with Max Strus's 3 and had a 15-4 run to pretty much ice the game, and then win 121 to 112, and it made me think that, no shock, I thought the Pacers were going to be stout. This is a team that had a big run last year, as you know. I understand they fell way short, getting swept by the Celtics in the conference final, but I didn't think they were going to be afraid of the Cavs. And maybe there was a little bit of rust on Cleveland, considering they had a week off, really 6 days off because they won on that Monday night game in Miami. But that was a game, if you're the Cavaliers, you have to be concerned. Because Donovan Mitchell, yes, he had 33 points, but he shot 30 attempts, way too many for that amount of points that he had in the game. And you really didn't get much from anybody else. I know when we pull up the box score here, you had Evan Mobley, who had 20 points, and of course now the Defensive Player of the Year, had 20 and 10, but didn't really have much of an impact. And not that he's a guy that's going to get an abundance of points, but certainly was not a guy that had any impact. Darius Garland still hasn't come back from that hamstring injury that he suffered there in the previous series. And now they have to scramble around because the Ty Jeromes and the DeAndre Hunters aren't going to bail you out all the time. And that's where the role players kick in. And Ty Jerome, I understand 21 points, but again, way too many shot attempts. He had 20 attempts in the game. DeAndre Hunter, paltry sample size, 11 points in 30 minutes. That's not going to cut it. And the Pacers, you know, like to run and gun. They could score with the best of them in the league. And they, for the most part, ran them out of the gym. Now, I understand that the Cavaliers did have their moments there. And let me pull up when that Strus scenario was, because I know that it had to be somewhere around 7 minutes to go. Let me pull up the play-by-play. And I thought to myself that if they're going to pull away, that was going to be the shot. That was going to be the one that you thought was going to take over the game. And no, as a matter of fact, it wasn't a Strus 3. The 3 happened earlier. He had the 2 free throws. And yes, it was 7 minutes, 7:05 to go in the game when it was 102-101. And maybe you thought, all right, they could take off here, stretch that lead, but then Haliburton did hit that 3 about 30 seconds later, 6:21 to go. A little bit more than that as he made the 3, 104-102. And from that point on, they didn't look back. And if I'm the Cavs, whether they need Garland back, and not that Garland is a big-time offensive player, but this can't be all on Mitchell. I think they're going to respond in the game 2. I could see them maybe not blowing them out, but I could see them winning comfortably, similar to what we saw there yesterday with the Pacers. But this is going to be a street fight between these two, and they're division opponents. They know each other well, so there should be no surprise when it comes to these two teams playing one another. But can the Pacers steal a game 2 tomorrow night? Listen, I think they can. I don't think they will, because the Cavs, I think they'll go back to the lab and they'll find a way, and I'm sure they're going to do whatever it takes. And remember, Haliburton, what are they going to do? They need to have some size there. Are you going to put Evan Mobley on Haliburton there to defend? They may even have to get him out of that low block, but then, of course, that leaves him not being that rim protector, despite the fact you do have Jared Allen there to play in the low post. But still, this is going to be, I'm not going to say a tall order, but this is going to be a very interesting task for the Cavaliers now to win 4 of the next 6 in order for them to advance in the Eastern Conference playoffs. And now, as we preview, tonight you have Knicks Celtics. We know what the Knicks have done against the Celtics in the regular season. And even though I didn't mention about this because this was all Brunson and even Bridges to a certain extent, but now the spotlight is on Karl Anthony Towns. You know Brunson's going to put up his points. I'm sure you're going to get some contribution from whether it be Mikal Bridges, although he's a guy that can be invisible in these games. OG Anunoby, another guy that could put up some numbers, but could also be invisible. And here's the key to the series. Jrue Holiday. If his hamstring is healthy or close to 100%, he's going to be the guy that's going to shadow Jalen Brunson. And as you've seen and as you know, Brunson is a guy that's going to try to get contact. He's going to try to attract it as much as he can. And it's up to Holiday and even, to a lesser degree, Derek White, who I'm sure they're probably going to switch off on from time to time. That is going to be the key to the series. And also what Karl Anthony Towns does. Because remember, Towns, in all likelihood, he's going to have Al Horford as well as Kristaps Porzingis guarding him, which means that Porzingis may be drawn out behind the arc to not be that low block presence to affect shots for players going to the basket. So if you're Karl-Anthony Towns, he's going to have to make a big-time contribution in order for them to advance, not only just win a game, but win the series. And even though he had those 2 big games in Detroit, but the last 2 games, despite the fact that they did win the series, was nothing on the right about. So how I look at it is that if Karl-Anthony Towns is going to be pedestrian or is going to float in and out of these games, the Knicks fan and the media are going to get all over him. Yes, they did not get all over him in the first series, and they didn't get all over him when he had bad performances against the Celtics in the regular season. But yes, now they're in the deep end of the pool. Pistons, I get it. Scrappy, young, youth, size, toughness, physicality, fine. Not anymore. Celtics can match wits against them, and they can match size, they can match length, then they can match physicality as well. I'm going to give the Knicks a game, and I've contemplated whether or not I should give them 2 games. Because of Holiday and how compromised he may be, I'm going to give them 2 games. Nothing more than that. Trust me, I want to say Celtics in 5, but I'll say Celtics in 6. Watch them steal one of these 2 games in Boston. Maybe the Celtics have a quiet shooting night from 3, and then they'll split in New York, where the Celtics will get the next 2. Now, I can see the Celtics winning in 5. I'd be shocked if there's a 7th game. Shocked! And I don't want to base it on what happened in the regular season. It's a new season. I'm sure the Knicks fan is feeling good, maybe cautiously optimistic, and I'm sure there's quite a few. Maybe I need to go back down to the Garden to take the temperature of the Knicks fan now, as I did a little over 2 weeks ago when I put up my vlog, if you saw that. But as it is right this very moment, the Celtics are the better team. They have more scoring. They have more depth. They have more just perimeter players. We know who they are. I don't need to break it down for you guys and gals. So, therefore, I see the Celtics in 6 games advancing. And then in the West, I think Denver can win 2 games against OKC. That is a prideful team. You saw that here against the Clippers. And I'm sure maybe for some on that team, they remember this round last year where they had spit the bit in a Game 7 where they were up by 20 against the Timberwolves. And granted, this is OKC, a 68-win team. Now, if you're a Nugget fan and if you're Denver, there's rust. They haven't played in a week. And if you're going to have a chance to steal one of these 2 games, you better steal Game 1. Because if they don't, chances are they're going to go back to Denver down 0-2, which they could still go back to OKC or still go back to, yes, OKC, tied at 2. But if they win Game 1, I think they'll win another game in Denver. And then, to me, that's when OKC will take off. And I think the Nuggets will lose the series, but OKC will win in 6. I think the Nuggets can win Game 1. Now, that's going to be predicated on what Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. does. This can't be all Nikola Jokic because they're going to have to play their game, not get wrapped up in what OKC's doing. And if they're able to do that, they'll be fine. But if it's going to be where Shea's going to dish, Shea's going to shoot, Shea's going to do what he does, and this is a battle of the MVPs when you think about it. But then you have the Lou Dorts of the world, you have the Kason Wallaces of the world, the Jalen Williams of the world, who are going to do what it takes to be that 3-headed monster, to slow down and Chet Holmgren as well, to do what they can to slow down Nikola Jokic. And remember, they played late in the year where Denver split in those 2 games. They played back-to-back on a Sunday, Monday, where they split those 2 games. So it's not as if they haven't played in quite some time. I think the Nuggets will find a way to win 2, but they won't win 4, as the Thunder will outlast the Nuggets. And then the other series, now, Anthony Edwards, we know he's a guy that a lot of people are going to look at here to see what he's going to do against this Warrior team. Now, you saw what they did against the Lakers. And again, this team is similar to where you had the aging vets. And in this case, obviously you had LeBron. And in this case with Steph and Draymond to a lesser degree. But there is some youth infused with the Warriors with the Brandon Podziemskis of the world, the Moses Moody's, guys like that. And then you have Buddy Hield, not as young as those guys, but still, you have to account for him considering what he did here in Game 7. If Minnesota's going to win this series, and mind you, they have the home court. Remember, they're the 6th seed and the Warriors are the 7th. So they don't have to worry about having to go to Golden State in a Game 7. But that's the thing I worry about. If the Warriors are playing on the road in a Game 7, and what we saw in the first round and what we've seen in the past, that is a dangerous proposition. If there is going to be a 6th game, and let's say the T-Wolves are up, you almost want to close them out in their building, considering their recent history as well. But I'm going to say the Wolves win in 7. Can they do it back-to-back? I don't know. I think they can, but I don't think they will. And I want to see Anthony Edwards now ramp up his game to the point where, yes, he is that guy. We already know he's that guy, but to get back to a conference final, to almost get back to the point to where they were last year and try to seal the deal to get themselves to an NBA final. This is a tough call. I think this is a situation where I can see Golden State winning this series. I can see them winning it in 7 more than 6. Although I could see them winning a game in 6, but Minnesota has size. You're going to have Rudy Gobert and Draymond Green. Remember their entanglement last year? Yes, you're going to have that to deal with there throughout this series. But I think the Wolves will prevail. I just think that Anthony Edwards, he's going to be on a mission. He's going to put this on his shoulders, although he does have players on his team, the Jaden McDaniels, the Naz Reeds. You know who the cast of characters are. And therefore, I think the T-Wolves will win in 7. And a T-Wolf OKC, I'm sure Adam Silver, who the Dom Perignon, you know that went down very smooth last night because Minnesota-Houston in the second round is not as sexy as Minnesota-Golden State. Knowing that he has Steph Curry there for another round, I'm sure they all rejoiced. But as much as I'm sure he'd want Golden State in a conference final, and even in an NBA final for that matter, having Minnesota there is no slouch. So that's what you have with the second round. And as far as the schedule here, tonight, Celtics, Knicks, 7 o'clock, followed by Denver, Oklahoma City. And again, Denver played 2 nights ago, and you could say, well, it just came off of a grueling series, 7-game series, etc. But they have momentum. And that's where maybe the rust has to get shaken off. And if the Nuggets could put up a big enough lead and hang on at the end to steal game 1, then, hey, they're in the driver's seat to at least extend this game, I think, to at least 6. I understand moral victory. What does that mean? You're trying to win the series and not just have a 6-game series where Oklahoma City is going to win. But you know what I'm saying? To at least have some length, because that's what you want here when you get to the second round. Then you have Indiana-Cleveland game 2 tomorrow, where Golden State at Minnesota, 7 to 9:30. Those games on TNT. And then you have game 2 of Celtics-Knicks and Nuggets-Thunder, 7 to 9:30 TNT as well. All the games are on TNT to start. And even Thursday's game, because they're not going to put Indiana-Cleveland until Friday. They'll skip that. They'll put Golden State, Minnesota as a standalone game on Thursday, 8:30, because then they'll reset to where Golden State, Minnesota will now be part of Celtics and Knicks, where they'll play a Game 3 Saturday, and then Minnesota, Golden State will have Game 3 Saturday too, and then you'll have 2 games each night from that point on the remainder of the second round. And as far as any NBA news and notes, you have big-time news with the coaching ranks with Greg Popovich stepping down as coach. He now will be an advisor going into the front office, where Mitch Johnson, the interim, will now be the head coach of the Spurs. So he moves up a seat there officially. And for Popovich, do I really need to throw all the bouquets at his feet, where his decade spanned more than 2.5, where his career spanned more than 2.5 decades, and the 5 titles we understand, and what he's done, what he's meant to the sport, arguably a top 3 coach in the history of the NBA. You could argue that, whether you have Jackson, Auerbach there in 1 and 2, Riley, Popovich, you could argue whether or not, because both of them have 5, and it's not just based on championships, but just the length of the career, the sustainability. The guy's won how many games, his percentage is the best of all time, especially when he had Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili there. And I don't know if it is the best considering he's had these lean years post those three guys, but we all know he's an all-time great. So kudos to him as he moves on to the next stage of his career. And then you had the Suns named Brian Gregory as he moves up in the ranks as GM. James Jones, who was the GM, now moves up in a more senior role. So let's see what Gregory does, where Matt Ishbia and company are trying to put together that team that has been just a flat-out disgrace, even with Kevin Durant coming there thinking that they're going to have a big-time team, and it's been anything but. So that's what you have with the NBA. And should I even say anything about J.J. Redick saying that his team has to be in championship shape? Is that a knock on Luka? Maybe. But if that's the case, he's got to wake up, get himself in better shape. And the sad thing is that even when he's not in best shape, he's still a top 5 NBA player. He's not going to get that this year, but it's interesting to know that if he was in tip-top shape, he would really be just an all-out force. Not as if that isn't the case now, but let's see if that's going to stick considering that they just started their offseason there, what was it, Wednesday night after they lost to the Timberwolves. All right, now let's shift it here into high gear to get you through these last 15 minutes or so when it comes to the world of sports. I get in the batter's box where I talk a little baseball, and not much has really gone on. I know the Padres come to town. They'll play the Yankees here for 3 after the Yankees lose 2 out of 3 to the Rays. And for the Padres coming in with a 5-game winning streak after polishing off the Pirates over the weekend, that is your big-time series heading in, because other than that, you really don't have a lot of interesting news and notes. Am I going to get crazy about Riley Green of the Tigers, who are 22-13, first place in the AL Central, hitting first time in Major League Baseball history, 2 home runs in the 9th inning, where he hit a solo shot to start off the inning and then hit a 3-run homer later on in the inning. All right, great accomplishment, but am I going to get geeked up over that? All right, I mention it just for fodder, but grand scheme of things, no biggie. Then you had the Royals, who have played better of late, last in the league in home runs. And what did they do yesterday to the Oriole pitching? 7 home runs in the game as they won on, and I believe a lot of solo shots because they won, I believe, 11-6. And for the Royals, who, of course, trying to get their season on track after a slow start. But Kansas City, as they believe won 2 out of 3. No, I believe, let's go back. Check this the right way. Yeah, they did win the back 2 in Baltimore, 2 out of 3. So kudos to the Royals, now 19-16, sandwiched with the Tigers in between are the Guardians. So the AL Central, who obviously had 3 teams into the 2024 Major League Baseball playoffs, now looking to be as stout and every much as a threat there in that division. So that's a good thing, as we're still 3 weeks away from Memorial Day, but we all know that that is the first point of the season that we're going to take a look at to see where these teams stand, despite the fact that a week from today will just about be slight, a game or 2 off of the quarter pole of the season, where a majority of the teams will play 39, 40 games out of 162. So think about that, how fast the baseball season is going. We're almost 25% in. So think about how, well, before you know it, we'll be at Memorial Day and then the 4th of July. But the big news coming out of these last few days are the injuries in baseball, and quite a few of them, including my team with the Mets, where you have 2 relievers, and they're lefty relievers at that. They're going to be shut down for the remainder of the season. Danny Young with Tommy John surgery, and AJ Minter, who they brought in this offseason, has a lat issue, which may need surgery, so they're both done. And then you have a situation where you have Jesse Winker. I get he's a role player, DH, played the outfield as they had a doubleheader yesterday and had an issue where he threw the ball into the infield and pulled an oblique. So looks like he's going to not only get an MRI, but he's going to be on the shelf here, probably at least 10 days on the IL. So that's a guy that they're going to lose as far as a pinch hitter, an extra bat. Now, who they brought up, I don't know as of yet. This just happened yesterday. But they did bring in Blade Tidwell, who pitched the first game of the 2 in which he lost and not have a good performance. And they lose the back 2 of a series to St. Louis, where they swept them a week ago, and then on top of that, won the Friday night game. But then with the rain out Saturday and had a double dip yesterday where they got swept. So not a good performance by the Mets yesterday as they go on to Arizona in a very interesting early season series for them. So the Mets hurting there is now they're going to need to get a lefty They had two, now they have none. Who's that lefty guy? You're not going to put Dave Peterson in the bullpen. He is your starter. So let's see what David Stern's going to do here over the next few weeks. Maybe not imminent, but you would think as you get deeper into the month and into early June that they're going to get a lefty somewhere from some team, as they're going to need to get a lefty out of their lineup, the opposing team's lineup. So you have that issue. Speaking of lefties, Shota Imanaga, the very good left-handed starter of the Cubs, he now is going to be on the IL as he left with a hammy trying to cover first base. And the Cubs also played very well. We're talking about division leaders here with the Mets and their injuries, and the Cubs 21-12, I believe, atop the NL Central. So how long he's going to be out, that remains to be seen. You also have a situation now with the Yankees with Anthony Volpe after diving for a ground ball, has a shoulder issue. It is day-to-day, may not be out longer than this series upcoming, where, like I mentioned, the Yankees will play the Padres. He may even play, like I said, day-to-day. But you have to wonder with the young shortstop whether or not that's going to affect him, especially at the plate. And if he does need some time off, maybe they'll give him a couple of days, maybe even the week before he comes back. But Volpe is a guy that you have to now keep an eye on if you're a Yankee fan. And as we know, Giancarlo Stanton now transferred to the 60-day IL because of the inflamed elbows on both sides. So who knows? They bring in Brian De La Cruz, the former Marlin, as well as Brave, which didn't work out in Atlanta in the early going of the season. And he's a good young player. Hasn't really stuck or shown any consistency, but he does have a decent bat. Went to Pittsburgh last year at the trade deadline, but familiar with him from his days in Miami. So let's see if he adds anything to a Yankee lineup that right now could use it. I mean, Aaron Judge, we all know, has hit the cover off the ball. Chaz Chisholm, another guy who has an oblique, who could be out for some significant amount of time. And even though he's put up some home run numbers, but his batting, 190? Not really off to a good start there as far as his average goes. So for the Yankees, they could use as much offense as possible as they've gone through a little bit of a lull here. And think about it. They lost 2 out of 3 to the Orioles. They lost 2 out of 3 to the Rays here. And then last weekend, who did they lose to? At home. Oh, no, they're on the road. Didn't they win those 2 out of 3? I'd have to pull that up off the top of my head. Let me see where we're at here with the Yankees. Last weekend before they went to Baltimore. Well, anyway, you get my drift. So the Yankees had a bit of a lull here, but they're 19-15. They're fine, but the Padres coming in, so that should be a very good series. And as far as any other injuries, I know Tristan Casas, although not a AL East leading team the way the Yankees are, but they're in second place. Tristan Casas, their first base, was going to be out with a ruptured patella tendon, so he's done, and it's the second year in a row that he's going to be out there slugging first baseman, so he's toast. Let's see what happens now, whether or not Rafael Devers will be back in the field, because you have Bregman at third, and of course, he's had his struggles, Devers, in the early part of this year. So we'll wait to see what's going to happen there in Beantown. But besides that, there's nothing else to add when it comes to Major League Baseball. Now, as far as the schedule goes for the week, we talked about the two that are going to be interesting there in the Bronx with the Padres coming to town and the Desert where the Mets will play the Diamondbacks. Now, you also have, no, I don't want standings, I want schedule. You have the Dodgers in Miami, Cleveland at Washington, the Reds in Atlanta, as Atlanta got the third game of that series. They beat the Dodgers last night, where the Dodgers took the first two. Houston at Milwaukee, Chicago, Kansas City, Seattle at Athletics. That's going to be a very interesting test for the Athletics, as they played very well. Won 2 out of 3 in Miami. Now they go home to play the Mariners, who are in first place in the AL West. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Texas at Boston, Philly at Tampa, Baltimore, Minnesota, San Francisco at Chicago. Good series there. Detroit, Colorado. Good luck for the Rockies. And that's what you have. Toronto at the Angels. They're skidding fast. So you have some good series to sink your teeth into. So we'll keep an eye on that as we get to Thursday's pod, as baseball now will be put aside. Quickly with the last two, I'll start off with the Derby there Saturday in the muck at Churchill Downs, where Sovereignty went neck to neck and mano a mano with Journalism. Those are the two favorites. Journalism was a 3-1. Sovereignty was 5-1. And even though they got out of the gate slow, but as they made the turn over the final half mile, that's where you saw them come to the track, and they were neck and neck, as I mentioned. as both horses, it looked like it was going to be a photo finish, nose to nose, but by a couple of heads length was Sovereignty the winner, as he now gets the first part of the Triple Crown. Whether or not he's going to run the Preakness, you would think, considering he was a heavily favored horse, and we need, I think, for horse racing, considering that the last time he had a Triple Crown winner was Justify in 2018. I think I said 2017 on Thursday's podcast, so my error there. But hopefully there won't be any holdouts. It'll be a situation where you'll have a decent field. You may have 10 horses. I could see the journalisms and a couple of other horses hold out for the Belmont, considering that they could really give Sovereignty, if he does run the Preakness, a run for their money. So we'll see what happens here. The race for the Preakness is not until the 17th, which is 2 weeks from this past Saturday. So we have a lot of time between now and then. We'll see what scratches are going to come about with these horses, if there are going to be any scratches or horses that are going to step away and come back there in the Belmont the first Saturday in June. But it wasn't a great race, and the elements certainly didn't add to it, but down the stretch they came. Did have a little bit of theater there, but Sovereignty was your winner. Nothing that was edge of your seat, or what is going to happen here, was it by just a hair on their chinny chin chins, not in the least, as the first leg of the Triple Crown is in the books, and of course Sovereignty being your winner. So we'll stay on top of that as we get close to the Preakness. And then lastly, I'm going to put on the boxing gloves. That's right, boxing. Because this weekend you didn't have one, you had two events. One that happened to be outdoors in Times Square, which, based on the highlights, I did not watch this, people. There's no way. And you had a headline by Devin Haney, as well as Ryan Garcia and Teofimo Lopez, where Lopez actually was the better of the three, where Haney, they were hoping for a Haney-Ryan Garcia. If both of them would have won, that would have set them up for a possible fight later in the summer, or maybe in the early part of summer, which would have been interesting. But as it was, Haney was uninspiring in his win. Ryan Garcia was unanimous and got knocked down in the second round by a fighter that I'd never seen in my life, Rolly Romero. And then you had Teofimo Lopez unanimously win his fight, and looking very good for him and his class. But again, Times Square is pretty much my backyard. You think I had any inkling or any desire to go down there and even watch, or maybe even try to get some credentials to cover that? Sorry, guys, not in the least. And as it was, Garcia was embarrassed in his fight, where one of the cards was 118-109. The others were within a couple of points. So it made me think, what the hell was that judge watching? So, all right, you had those two fights, or really those three fights. Maybe not the best locale, even though they try to make it a little bit different outside. And it was a warm night in New York City, no rain. So it was a situation where I'm sure the fight fans went out. I don't even know where the tickets were sold or how this came about with traffic and blocking it off. But anyway, who knows if they're going to do that again, but certainly not one to write home about if you looked at those three fighters. And then on Saturday in Saudi Arabia, you had Canelo Alvarez going up against a guy that I've never seen in my life, and one that, upon watching it, because I never heard of him, and he's a fighter from Cuba, and he goes by the name of, let me see if I pull this up here real quick, because I did not even pay attention to this fight. Goes by the name of William School, and Canelo won unanimously, but again, that was not another fight to write home about. Not one to really say, all right, well, Canelo's fighting. Let me see who he's going to go up against. I found out Friday that he was fighting Saturday. And usually the first Saturday of May and the first Saturday in November, for whatever the reason, are big-time fight nights. And Alvarez here on a Cinco de Mayo, and I understand it's not a holiday, people. It's just a reason to eat tacos and have margaritas and Coronas. But I don't know if it was something that Alvarez took because he felt like, hey, he wanted to stay sharp, that he wasn't going to have another fight until his next fight, which that is one I'm going to watch. That is one that is going to be anticipated. And he was actually present there in Saudi Arabia on Saturday, where Terrence Crawford, 41-0 with 31 knockouts for the super middleweight title, which is the one that Alvarez won again. It was his defense. That is going to be a fight to watch. And I get it, for the average sports fan or for the good sports fan, they may or may not watch, but that is one. And not that I've watched every Terrence Crawford fight, of course, but I'll be glued to that. I'll be on top of that. That is September 24th, where those two fighters will go at it. Crawford does not have a fight leading up to that, so who knows if there's going to be a rust issue. I can't recall when his last fight was. Again, because boxing is so off my radar that I don't even discuss it unless we get to a fight that is worthy of not only being watched, but even mentioned here on the podcast. So you know, as we get closer, hopefully there are no hiccups or injuries that will derail the fight. But even Alvarez said that, yes, I've been anticipating it. I'm going to look forward to it. It's going to be a great fight. Obviously, Crawford is putting his undefeated record on the line, and Alvarez, with all the fights that he's had and his reputation and his stance in boxing of what he means to the sport, that should be a very good fight. And hopefully there's no controversy, no nonsense. Oh, it was a draw. Oh, this judge scored it this way. And we know boxing is littered with matches like that over the years. So plenty of time between now and then to even discuss it, let alone get into it. But I just thought to throw that out here as one to anticipate, as that is actually going to be a fight in the fall. Granted, September 24th, but that's just a few days after the official beginning of fall. So we still have to get through spring as well as summer to even start to discuss and to converse about what a potential epic Terrence Crawford-Canelo Alvarez match could be. In fact, I got my dates mixed up. It's not the 24th. It's actually going to be in the summertime. September 12th at Allegiant Stadium. So it's not the T-Mobile or the old Thomas and Mack Arena. Allegiant Stadium. They said the hell with the T-Mobile, which would fit about 23,000. We're going to go Allegiant, where we're going to try to cram 80,000 into that building. Of course, the home of the Raiders. I'm sure the Raiders will be on the road in that opening week, considering that the schedule will come out a week from Wednesday. So that's how big the fight's going to be. It's not going to be in an arena. It's going to be in a stadium. And I'm sure, and I'll look forward to it, but still plenty of time between now and then to even unpack that. But I'm sure as we get closer, one that we'll certainly look forward to. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, people, as I implore you to do so each and every podcast, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review on Apple, Spotify, the channel on YouTube at JAYREELZ. Wherever you listen, please take a screenshot, send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies, to the good sports fan, the great sports fan, the casual, the not so good but watches every now and again, the kook like yours truly in your lives. Please take a screenshot, send it to me. I'll splash it all on my social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number, because I am trying to elevate this and I need your help. From the bottom of my heart, people, if you haven't subscribed, do so. Because this little engine that could is trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, where therefore I can start to monetize. This is my full-time job. That's right. I do not have another job, and I am not earning any income as of yet in this endeavor. But with your help, hopefully I can do so through those channels that I mentioned, because not only do I produce 2 podcasts a week, as you know, Monday and Thursday, also a live stream every Wednesday on YouTube, 12 noon. I have critique videos that are already in the works that I'm trying to target a day where I'm going to release those every so often. Other sports vlogs that I have in the pipe, when it comes to Citi Field, when it comes to maybe going down to the Garden to take the pulse of the Knicks fan yet again. Another one forthcoming, going to Yankee Stadium, which is going to be very interesting as a Met fan, as the Subway Series will begin a week from this coming Friday. I got a lot cooking. And therefore, I need a lot more eyeballs watching what it is that I do. I even have lifestyle content. I even have things that you could certainly rally around if sports isn't in your wheelhouse that I'm also going to put forth. I'm in the middle of doing one right now that I'm going to put out in June, which is, I'll just put it this way. Here's your hint, transformative. So please, people, get on it. Please subscribe, rate, review on all the aforementioned social media accounts, channels, etc. And of course, whether you do or do not know, if you want to send me a question, suggestion, comment, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com, the old-fashioned way. hit me up. I'll be more than follow up with you guys and gals because you know that as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and camera, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the dice. One more time. Diamond, ice. I'm thinking of diamond and ice at the same time. You don't know what you're going to get on this podcast. On the world of the diamond, ice, hardwood, as well as the gridiron, tennis court, golf course, boxing ring, octagon, racetrack, you name it, people, because no matter where a game competition is being played on, you know that I'll have it covered. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.